Yes. GW WrestleMania. Like, oh. Coming up on Capital Crossfire, 4 panelists join us to discuss the latest with the Trump administration, special election results, and Democratic opposition. Our experts break down everything from executive orders, new tariffs, and deportations. Plus, we hear from students on campus about their latest political takes.
Joining us today for our discussion, Liz Stoddard, Mara Riegl, Paul Lieb, and Kieran Laffey.
GWTV does not promote or endorse any SGA candidate, and any appearance on GWTV is as a GW student and not a candidate. I'm Nicole.
And I'm Mylinda.
From the GWTV studios in Washington, D.C.
This is Capital Crossfire.
Dismal year with the Flyers. Andrei Svechnikov makes his return this season.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
I'm your moderator, Vivien Williams. Welcome to our panelists. We have a lot to cover, so let's get started. Kieran, I'll give you the first question. So amid bipartisan criticism of Pete Hegseth and Michael Waltz from the Signal chat, do you think the pair will be able to responsibly carry out their duties, and should they resign?
Well, first off, it's great to be here. Never been back in the SMPA studio here, and what a great site you have. I'm with a few of my friends here, and I'm excited to talk about some of the issues. To start with the question, I woke up that Monday. I saw the news alert from The Atlantic, and I always say you have to take everything The Atlantic says with a grain of salt. But after reading the article, I'm not here to make excuses. I thought it was unacceptable. I think it was irresponsible. And as far as I'm concerned, I think an investigation into it is a good thing. I think transparency is a real imperative for this new administration, and I want answers, and I think all Americans would probably agree with that. To point out some other things, though, I've seen the Democrats really get passionate about this problem. And look, someone who's been following politics for a few years now, like we all lived through the Biden years, and I mean, none of the Democrats who calling for Hegseth and Walz to resign even said a word about Afghanistan withdrawal, when Lloyd Austin went and checked himself into a hospital without letting anyone know. We had 13 deaths in Afghanistan. None of those folks calling for resignations now said a peep about anything like that. So I don't want to be hypocritical. I want an investigation. Let's get answers before we act irrationally, and we'll see what plays out. But I thought it was unacceptable, and let's get to the bottom of it all.
Just to jump in right there, I 100% agree. I think there needs to be an investigation, but I think it's interesting how we went from the question about whether or not Pete Hegseth should resign to Afghanistan and Joe Biden. The question on the table is whether or not there should be some real accountability. And if I'm reading the message, which I have one of them in front of me, which is literal launch plans that details the use of F-18s, that details the weather and the timing of the strike, I have to say that there are ways for this to never have happened, and that is to not use signal as a way to communicate covert government information, because actually we do have a system to communicate those operations that do not include journalists, that don't accidentally be added to these chats. So I think at the end of the day, when it comes to their resignation, I think they should absolutely resign, and I think that Trump can pick another set of other people to take their spots. But as of right now, like, this would sink anybody else, and I will say in any other Democratic administration, if this were to happen, it would sink another individuals in those roles as well. I think, like, we can talk about accountability across the board, but the question was, should they resign? And I think the astounding answer that we both agree on is there should be an investigation. In my opinion, they should resign.
Yeah, if I can respond to that quickly, I think the reason I like to pan out into a broader sense is the one thing that bothers me in politics is the word hypocrisy. And I think both parties do it. And to fully get to the bottom of this, I think it's important to look back over the last decades of American foreign policy. And I think it's super important. I would completely, disagree with that fact that if this happened under a Democrat administration, that they would be called to resign. I'd make the argument that 13 deaths that were preventable in Afghanistan is far worse than the signal leak, not defending the signal leak. And I'm happy you brought the message here. If you actually read it, which I'm happy you did, I'd recommend everyone reads it, because as far as I'm concerned, yeah, we don't want it to get out. That's good U.S. foreign policy, taking out the Houthis in Yemen, something the prior administration failed to do. I think it's good policy. I wish it didn't get out. I want an investigation, but fully would I disagree that the Democrats in the past or the future would ever call for their members to resign, because we saw that stuff not happen. So.
I'm going to jump in. If any of you guys want to rebuttal to that.
Yeah, so I just want to address one thing that you said there. You brought up how, yes, this is bad, but Lloyd Austin checked himself into a hospital without telling anyone. There's a huge difference to me in Lloyd Austin going to get care he needs and giving out compromising national security details that could lead to far more than 13 deaths. Over an insecure network of communication. One of those things is trying to be a better, more responsible person in order to take care of your job and to be able to continue doing your job. And the other one is a breach of national security. The other is a threat to troops in our country who are serving abroad. And the other is completely inexcusable. Now, Lloyd Austin, not telling anyone before checking in, not a perfect thing to do. Not going to defend that. But if this signal chat truly is as bad as everyone says it was, which I suspect it is, that is so much more inexcusable than Lloyd Austin checking into a hospital.
If I can quickly respond, I think we just have a total disagreement on it. Like, I'd rather my Secretary of Defense alert an administration that's, I think, the 6th highest ranking member of the presidential cabinet, the top dog for military affairs, an absent director of the Department of Defense opposing this. Like, I think we just disagree on it. I want my Department of Defense leader to be transparent. And when I heard that happen, I was completely disappointed. And I think the American people would back me on that. I think that was far worse.
I agree in general. I think it was a big mistake, but at the same time, it was very much blown out of proportion. We were told it was going to be war plans and it was going to be this big thing. It was not. Yes, there were attack plans, and I agree, we need accountability. However, there has been so many other mistakes in the Biden administration that we have seen throughout their 4 years that, again, there has been no accountability, and we're just not held to the same standard by the media or by the people. Afghanistan withdrawal, the handling of Russia, Ukraine. We have two new wars have started under this Biden administration. And we also have to look at the immigration policies that were passed that were blatantly just really bad for America. And that led to so many deaths. So as much as you want to pin this and blow this out of proportion, it just was not at the same scale that we saw for the last 4 years.
On the topic of immigration, I want to move on to our next question. With regards to the reports of legal residents being deported to El Salvadorian prisons, what is your view on the recent developments of ICE and the Trump administration's deportations? We can start with anyone.
So I'd actually like to make a comment on this first. Now, we can all agree, all four of us, and most of America can agree that illegal immigration is a massive problem in this country and that it has to be fixed. But the difference in our opinion is that I think you guys are probably more okay with these ICE raids, rounding people up, sending them off to prison. Specifically, they're sending people to Guantanamo, which, by the way, sending illegal immigrations to somewhere we used to send war criminals, that's a whole other subject, but equally inexcusable. Now, with illegal immigration, you guys might be okay with this, but I think it's a much greater systemic issue, and we have to address immigration more at the root about why exactly so many people are coming here illegally and how inaccessible it is to become an illegal citizen of this country. Now, do I think that criminals who are here illegally deserve to be arrested and deported? Yes, but a lot of these illegal immigrants are not committing atrocious crimes. They're people who are feeding into our GDP and are trying to make a better life for themselves here. Sending off citizens of this country to prisons and other places because we can't do our due diligence is disgraceful and disgusting, and these raids have got to stop.
If I could just respond to that, sending Tren de Agua MS-13 gang members out of our country, I don't think that's despicable at all, and
No, that's
I
not.
expect that. Well,
I said
you didn't make it
criminals
clear.
being deported is
Well,
okay.
they're going to Guantanamo Bay. Are you not for Tren de Agua members going to Guantanamo Bay? 'Cause
I
that's-
explicitly said that criminals being deported is perfectly good.
But you
with
said
me.
Guantanamo Bay is bad. We're sending gang members there. Are you opposed to that?
I said illegal immigrants who are not committing crimes being sent to Guantanamo is deplorable and awful.
You didn't mention that.
Those
Let me ask you
are
directly. Are you
MS-13
opposed to gang members going to Guantanamo Bay?
to Guantanamo?
Gang members,
Somewhere we
convicted
used to torture
rapists.
people?
I am for convicted rapists and gang members probably going to Guantanamo Bay, and I would feel that the average American would support that. And my evidence is, and a theme I like to talk about when we have these nice conversations is, when Donald Trump ran for president, he let out to the public a very clear policy platform. Trump Force 47, Agenda 47, was open to the public. He ran for 2 years, a long time. You could have read these long PDF documents we read in our classes here at GW, very similar. And things like mass deportations, things like securing the border, really everything that has to do with immigration was clearly outlined. And we love democracy. I hope he won, and he's enacting it. And just like the ABC poll that came out last month, 70% of the people of this country feel that he's fulfilling his campaign promises. So he's fulfilling his campaign promises. You might disagree with the policies, but the American people voted these policies in, and you're seeing them play out.
But there's also a standard of care and due process that every individual in the United States of America is guaranteed. And we can argue that horrible people should receive punishment. We can always argue that. I will always stand up and say, yes, you should have consequences for your actions, and you shouldn't be in this country if you are a criminal who came over the border illegally. But you know what I will also argue? I will also argue that you have a right to a trial and an attorney like we give every other American in this system. And I think at the end of the day, sending them to a black site that the CIA used to torture people without due process, including American citizens, is not correct, not right. And even though at the time when they said that they were going to be using Guantanamo, do you know what Secretary of State Powell said during the Bush administration about taking individuals to a black site not on American soil? Do you know what they said he would say? They said, we're not going to tell Powell we're going to take detainees there because he'd blow a gasket. Because just at how many rights were being violated by the use of Guantanamo and the pressuring of detainees. So my question at the end of the day is, you can set up a system, you can set up a place of detention that does not, has not been used to torture American citizens illegally without due process. And so at the end of the day, we can agree 1,000% that immigration, illegal immigration, needs to be attacked at the root, and that we need to make it easier for people to become citizens of this country, and that we also need to make sure that we don't have criminals crossing the border and staying in our country illegally. But at the end of the day, the deportation and how we do it matters, and if we are being, careful and responsible in what we apply when it comes to civil and constitutional rights, I think that should apply to everyone in how we do this. And I think how we're doing this is very cruel. And even if you disagree with what I'm saying or whether or not criminals should be offered the same rights, is that I think at the end of the day, we are a nation of laws and we promise everybody a presumption of innocence, and we haven't given that to anybody. And you and I can have this disagreement cyclically, but at the end of the day, we're not doing it in a way that, promotes rights in this country that we give everybody else, and using Guantanamo Bay is a particular black spot that we shouldn't be using, because there are other detention facilities that are available that are not used to torture people and that are not used to violate constitutional rights of Americans.
And
Paul, do you have a rebuttal? Oh, sorry. Go
Yeah, I'm all for due process, but we have to look at some of the situations that we were facing over the last 4 years. Lake and Riley and some of the victims that we have seen over the last 4 years have been, obviously they're tragic incidents. And it is clearly because of the disastrous policies that the Biden administration has pushed. We now have the Lake and Riley Act, which it's terrible that has to even be said, that these criminals have to be deported now. Illegal aliens, first off, are already criminals once they step into here, and then they commit crimes. And at one point, they were not getting deported, so the Lake and Riley Act did that. We have seen the numbers plunge all the way down to about 7,000, a record low border encounters last month. And if we just looked at last year's performance, we had over 100,000 people coming across the border in the month of March in 2024. 54% of Americans agree with the immigration policy currently being enacted. And I like that this question was directed at us, and that's great. And I'm very happy that we have a divide here. But 54% of Americans tend to agree on this. And Trump's polling has always been rather low and underestimated. So who knows what the real number is? And we have seen great action taken by this presidency to really halt the numbers at the border.
Do you think Americans agree when they are being accidentally detained and deported to nations that they aren't even citizens
Again,
of?
54%. I didn't make up that number. That's
well,
CBS
what
polling.
about the basic rights violations of detaining American citizens and
Why
then
are you
deporting
defending?
them?
Why are you
If you'll
defending?
excuse me, if
Why
you'll
are you
excuse
defending
me
the
for a
illegal
second.
aliens and
I'm
not?
not defending illegal aliens.
Excuse
What
me
I
for
am
a
defending
second.
is the basic rights of our citizens. And why are we
Our citizens are not our citizens. That's the
There have
issue.
been reported cases of us accidentally reporting American citizens.
Look, if I could just say
Hold on,
something quickly.
hold on.
I want to
Mara,
make time for
please.
the next question. It seems like we're at a big
I just want
disagreement
one
here.
thing on the record.
One
before-
last thing.
Calling them illegal aliens does not give you a moral high ground.
That's
They're
not the
people.
goal of that.
They're
If I can
people
just
too.
respond to that
You can call
very,
them
very
illegal
briefly.
aliens.
I'm so sorry.
I
We do
wish-
need
Are
time
we
for the next
serious?
question. So, Elon Musk has described Social Security as a quote-unquote Ponzi scheme, and numerous Americans have reported not receiving Social Security checks amid cuts. What do you believe Trump's administration objectives are with Social Security?
Well, just 10 seconds. I think this is very important. Legal immigration was one of the top-rated issues of the election. I wish my counterparts in the Democrat Party had this much passion when people like Lake and Riley were murdered and the illegal immigration problem was crushing our communities over the past year. Now to Social Security. Look, I think Social Security is a very important issue, and I think I can speak for probably both of us. We want folks on it to receive their funds, but the problem we've seen over the past decades is fraud and abuse, just like we've seen throughout all of our government departments. And what's the new administration doing? Mandating verification and ID so folks legitimately can receive the funds for Social Security. We have over 1 million people, they estimate, who are non-citizens on Social Security. It's crushing it. It's become unaffordable. Donald Trump, what does he want to do? He wants to stop taxing Social Security, something I think is bipartisan. I think everyone should get behind. And I want to push back on this notion that Elon Musk looking into these departments is a bad thing. The American people voted for major government reform, and I think it's a tragedy that the other side has almost demonized an issue that used to be bipartisan, which is government efficiency. So with this issue, I think Paul included, we don't want to have cuts for legitimate Social Security receivers. We want fairness. We want them to receive funds. And by the way, just reported, if we can actually cut the waste and fraud, Social Security earners are expected to get more funding, which I think is a great thing.
Now, just to respond to something you said there really quickly, you said that you think that Doge on our side is being villainized and demonized as this horrible, awful thing. Democrats are not upset with the idea of looking into where we can cut spending. We're not upset with that. We are all for government efficiency. It's great. Our issue comes with the fact that it is a department being run by an unelected bureaucrat who is A, not American, and B, employing people who literally have no standard of decency. Like, explain to me exactly why a 19-year-old college dropout who uses the social media handle Big Balls is, sorry, it's so ridiculous, I have to laugh. Explain to me why that is any example of efficiency. Because here's the thing, with Social Security, the goal here, this question asks about the objective. Elon Musk does not care about making sure that American citizens are safe and happy down the line. He's not even an American citizen. He actually has no stake in this issue. He is only in this administration to serve himself. So if it serves him to cut Social Security, he's gonna do it. And honestly, it's easier to say, no, he won't, that could never happen, not in America, but that's the reality we're looking at right now.
I disagree that he's in it to serve himself. He's the richest man in the world. He doesn't really need anything. He's sleeping on the office floor in the Eisenhower Executive Office building. Last thing before I go to Paul, I just don't get it. It seems that my good friends on the other side seem to be mad at the guy who's finding the fraud and not the folks who have committed it. It just disappoints me.
It's not, at the core of it, it's the way he's doing it. I think we can all agree that we would all like to stop, fraud, waste, and abuse in the government 100%. But do I think cutting funding and the amount of people who work in, for example, the Veterans Affairs offices? No. Do I think that making veterans wait 30 minutes to get a contact on a suicide hotline is cutting waste, fraud, and abuse? I don't think so. Do I think that cutting the amount of forest rangers in national parks is cutting waste, fraud, and abuse? No, because those individuals pick up your trash. Those individuals call rescue and response teams to you, especially for those who get stuck in some of the most treacherous parts, whether that's the mountains or the waterways. I don't think that's waste, fraud, and abuse to have those people employed. I also don't think that cutting a lot of it is waste, fraud, and abuse. I also think that it's been particularly disorganized, right? And instead of actually going through bit by bit and analyzing what can be cut, they cut and then they regret. Like they cut so many individuals working on the avian bird flu response, right? And you know what happened? They hired them back. And then they cut individuals who are working on the nuclear program. And you know what? Whoopsie, we got to hire you back. What I'm simply saying is that it is shambolic how it is being operated. It is disorganized, and it is also staffed by individuals who do not have the experience to do this. Whether it's racist remarks that said something like along the lines of, normalize Indian hate, or for example, individuals who don't have college degrees, have never worked in the government before. And while I'm all for making sure that our government is efficient and spending our tax dollars correctly, I think where they are cutting and what they are doing is completely disorganized and also doesn't qualify as waste, fraud, and abuse. Because simply stating that we need to have less park rangers, I'm sorry, have you been to one of the national parks? In fact, we need more park rangers, right? Because if we're not going to protect this land, we need someone to do it. And who's going to do that? The National Park Service, right? Or making sure that we have accurate care and individuals who can staff departments of the Veterans Affairs. I think that's not waste, fraud, or abuse.
All right, sorry to interject. There will be more time to come with our panel later on, but for now, let's take a quick break and turn to our reporting on the Signal group chat security breach. Let's hear what students on campus had to say.
What do you think about the recent Signal chat leaks?
I think accountability should be had or taken. I think that in any job, if you're making a mistake, there should be accountability. So personally, I'm not in national defense or intelligence because I absolutely would add a reporter to the chat, right? I mean, that's why I'm not doing this job.
I think it's a little ridiculous that the Secretary of Defense and these high-ranking officials are sharing our national secrets over a group chat like they're a bunch of teenage girls. I think that it was frankly reckless of them to do that, and it's endangering our service members.
It's just ridiculous. I can't believe that people discussing national security were just on a group chat. It's crazy. I can't even believe it. And these are people that, first off, weren't elected technically, we're appointed, and we're just evidently not qualified for the job.
I think that that's probably one of the most immature things that could have happened in the highest seat of our government. These are the highest ranking military officials in the country, and they are using a not secure mode of communication, and somehow they managed to add, of all people, a journalist. I just think that there's so much negligence happening. SNL could not come up with better.
Do you feel that amid Pete Hegseth's past with Fox News and his recent controversies over his alcohol use, do you think this will have a serious damaging effect to his reputation?
We all make mistakes in life, and it just takes time to learn. And he's taking this job seriously because he could have been a Fox News and get paid more, but he chose to serve for Department of State because he cared about this country as much as Kamala Harris do, as much as former President Barack Obama do, and every other people do.
It doesn't seem like much sticks reputation-wise with this administration currently, but I do think it was a serious misstep. And I don't think it can be explained away by, everyone else does it. who cares? I don't think it will stick, but it should.
I think his reputation's already in the gutter. He really seems like a DUI hire, and I think that it won't realistically change the perception of him in the public eye, because either the people who like him are already going to like him, and the people who don't definitely don't now.
Do you think resignations are likely because of the signal chats?
To be honest, no. I don't think they're likely, just because I think that we're dealing with egos that are so large that they probably aren't going to resign. Plus, unfortunately, like, this isn't even the worst thing that has or will happen during the administration. So I don't think any resignations will come of it.
You can't just like force them to fired when they've only been in the office for 3 months. So I think just give them some time, take them time to adjust. And, I'm pretty sure this won't happen again. That's all I can say. I mean, if you look at the Democrats, I look at the Russian email scandal too. Democrats are also not free from that too.
No, I don't think so. I think that incompetence is really baked into this administration, and so being incompetent kind of comes with the job description for them, and they're not going to get fired for doing something like this.
To be honest, no, because I think they know that more ridiculous things will happen, and if they actually resign, that means that when other people who also aren't qualified do ridiculous, obviously terrible things for this country, that then it'll set a precedent. They will have to resign.
And with that, let's turn back to our panelist. President Trump announced reciprocal tariffs yesterday. According to the Associated Press, he declared that there will be a 10% baseline tax on imports from all countries and higher tariff rates on dozens of nations that run trade surpluses with the United States. How do you think this will impact U.S. foreign relations and our consumers? Paul, let's start with you.
Look, I think it's a president doing exactly what he said he's going to do on the campaign trail, and I think a lot of Americans genuinely agree with the policies that he's been pushing. Just around 50% of Americans agree with the tariffs. And you know what? I think it's about time that we start to really get on it and make this trade deals fair. It was Nancy Pelosi herself that said U.S.-China trade is a trade job loser. It's an absolute loser. We have a $1.2 trillion trade deficit, and we're finally seeing effective action taken by this presidency to really cut down on that. We've seen, whether it's Canada, Mexico, I can go on, India, Israel, Japan, the EU, they're all really coming in, and they're giving concessions to this administration based off of these tariffs that are being done. We're seeing manufacturing jobs really trying to get back into the United States as we are losing it. It's a national security issue, and the Trump administration is fulfilling it.
Just want to highlight something. We have a free trade agreement with the nation of South Korea, and yet they have a higher tariff than the nation of Brazil, who we actively compete against, from 35% to 10%. And just in general, it's bad policy. Also, taking out tariffs on places like Reunion Island, which is part of the French Commonwealth, and they have a 37% tariff for a nation that barely has 1 million people on it. It's an island nation that will probably sink into the ocean before 2050. All right, and let's also look at Nauru. They have a 30% tariff, and whoa, what are they competing against the U.S. in? A small amount of pork supplies and phosphates. Wow, how scary. And also, additionally, a small island nation. What I'm saying is, not only did the applications of these tariffs not make sense, but it's also tariffing nations like Svalbard, which is a small island in the Arctic, whose job, you can't even stay on Svalbard 100% of the year because it's illegal, right?
With Svalbard specifically, Svalbard is so insignificant in terms of population. You're not even allowed to have a baby on the island because there's no hospital or doctors to take care of you. Why exactly is that the priority right now?
Very simple, and I'll put it this way, because at first when I saw they're tariffing some of these places with no people, I thought this would get brought up, these smaller nations. The problem is, if we don't tariff some of these nations, like you mentioned, French-owned, I think the Penguin one is owned by the Norway, Norway, I think it is. What companies can do in those larger countries can list their business addresses to some of those smaller nations and take advantage of the tariff policy. So it's just a question of fairness, and they're doing that. With tariffs, I know it's in the news and everyone wants to talk about it. Again, he said he was going to do it in the campaign trail, and he's doing it. The United States needed change with regards to trade and tariff policy. Everyone agrees with that. And another unfortunate circumstance that I think I understand it, but I want to point it out. Where are all the tears that we're seeing now about tariffs when the factories in Gary, Indiana went out of business? Or in the middle of Michigan, where we've lost, they estimate, 90,000 factories since 1997. The manufacturing jobs in this country went overseas, and we suffered, and no one even seemed to care.
Well, let me answer that for you.
Please.
So, first and foremost, where are you seeing tears, period? No one here is crying.
Well, not
and
here,
acting
but
like
if
a
you watched The
baby.
Morning Joe on MSNBC this morning, they were very upset.
Who watches Morning Joe?
I agree.
Anyway, but
Not a lot
the
anymore.
question that you're asking is why weren't we upset when manufacturing plants closed here?
Yes.
We were upset. Here's the problem, though. If you impose all of these tariffs abroad, blanket 10% minimum, and trust me, it gets higher. I'm looking at Liz's sheet right now.
Madagascar, 47%
I was
for
gonna
a
say,
tariff. What did
I'm
Madagascar
seeing-
ever do to us?
I'm seeing Cambodia is that 49 or 50?
49.
Yeah. Doing things like that, it's going to put so much undue stress on the American people because, let's be real, manufacturing in this country, we would love to bring it home. It would be great for our economy. It would be great for our people who live here. But we don't have the facilities to replace this deficit right now. We don't have enough production here. We don't have enough people doing it. We can't reasonably afford to make up the difference from what you're charging so much more for abroad. And maybe you'll say to me, oh, but Americans should be choosing to buy American goods. It'll be cheaper for them. Some people don't have the luxury of choosing based on brand what exactly they can buy. Some people live paycheck to paycheck, and the cheapest option is what they're going to do. So if you want to solve this problem, make up the deficit, bring more factories here for real, put some jobs in place, and then we can talk about putting blanket tariffs like this on.
Donald Trump is doing that. We're seeing multiple companies now coming into the United States. We have around $3 trillion of foreign investment coming into the United States in the first 3 months.
He's not doing it fast enough, though.
Joe Biden got $1 trillion in his 4 years. We've seen.
We're not talking about Joe Biden.
Well, why are we not comparing it? I don't understand that. This is something that's.
But you're talking about Trump's policy. This
Yes.
was never a policy for Biden.
Well, the
We're
economy
talking
was
about the
a
problem.
disaster for the last 4 years. He's trying to fix it. Our
That's
trade
actually incredibly untrue.
The market
market
today
has gone down.
We could
since
talk about the market
Biden
today.
left.
The top 10% of this country owns about 95% of the stock. So if that's what we're talking about, that's fine. If you want to protect the top 10%, that's fine. We, as a Republican Party, have shifted to the party of the middle class, and we have
For who?
nailed
You're
this
being,
through.
You're being run by
The
an unelected
UAW, the
bureaucrat
Alliance of
and a
American
fake
Manufacturers, the
millionaire.
Coalition of Prosperous America represents manufacturing business. They're all applauding these tariffs. They've come out in support of them.
Your party, like ours, like every party, is bought and sold. You'll do what
You're
your
admitting
owners
you're bought and sold. That's
want you
great.
to.
I appreciate that. First time ever
the-
Democrats done that on camera.
I think at the
Liz?
core, thank you, Paul. I think at the core, what you need to understand is that because of the instability in the market, not only are people moving to European markets for investing, which I think is a really disastrous sign that we're not seeing people focus on purchasing of American assets, because that's one of our biggest things, purchase of American assets, right? However, you see more strength in the European market because people no longer see our market as stable, right? They no longer see the policy changes as stable. And also, with Trump's attack on our financial structures, like trying to make the Fed less independent, that also calls for concern about the safety of our markets and the safety of the trading in our economy, right? So I think at the end of the day, yeah, I'm not out here standing up for the guy who has a hedge fund. What I am saying is that those prices from tariffs will be reflected in things like eggs and milk and the things that we pay a lot of money for importation. So, but I also just want to focus on back to the question on these tariffs, right? Not only were these numbers completely assigned, not based on anything, but based on the deficit, right? Which isn't exactly how you do anything, but you also are looking at ridiculous amount of tariffs on these countries. Like the Falklands has a 42% tariff on it. The Falklands. Are we joking here, right? At the end of the day, not only is this indicative of the disorganized nature of Donald Trump, but it's also indicative of the fact that people are moving away from the American market, and that's the last thing we want, right? American market and economy stability. That is what we have sold forever. And now that's coming into question, and I don't think we should be outbid by the Europeans when it comes to having one of the strongest economies in the world, and that's what's happening right now. And not only that, but consumer and manufacturer confidence is down.
Sorry
and
to
so
jump
that makes,
in. We do need to head to the last question of the night. Democrats had a strong performance in special elections on Tuesday. winning a Wisconsin Supreme Court seat and slimming down Republican margins in Florida. What do you think this says about the broader popularity of the Trump agenda, especially given Elon Musk's financial involvement in these races?
Well, so I think a good thing to comment on here would be the expectations versus reality of what we were thinking about when Trump was running for office. A lot of people thought Trump would come in, he'll make things better, he'll lower the cost of eggs on day one, he'll get rid of the illegal immigrants, and right now he's not delivering on a lot. Like, maybe, yes, he's rounding up illegal immigrants, but at the same time, he's hurting Americans and rounding up Americans too. Now, with the cost of eggs, he didn't make anything cheaper. So, you may laugh, but things are getting more expensive, and that's not
eggs.
that's not a
not
surprise.
eggs. Eggs are the lowest they've been under Trump right
Buddy,
now.
they're still not as low as they were under Biden
That's not
because
true.
Trump
That's not
fired
true.
all the
So
guys who were working
look it up.
on bird
Don't
flu.
fact check you afterwards.
Google.
It's fine, but
All
I'm
right.
just saying.
Anyway, but what this, moving on to the topic at hand, what these elections, what these elections can tell us about politics and about what people expected from Trump is that people are not happy with what they're getting. Seats in very deep red areas of Florida should not be within a 10-point margin if this election should be proving that Trump is doing a great job. If it's a deep red area, it should stay that way, and it shouldn't have two Democrats losing by, I believe it was, I think it's 8 points. 8 points, that's not a big majority. And if we keep going this way, people are gonna close that gap even more, and maybe they'll flip blue. And by the way, with the Wisconsin election, that is just proof that you can't buy elections. Elon and his cohorts spent $20 million, including handing out $1 million checks to voters who supported his ideal candidate in order to try to sway that election, and it still didn't work. That just goes to show Americans are not bought and sold like the parties are all the time, and Americans actually still care about the principle of democracy and freedom and a certain level of decorum and decency and rationale in their court system.
I like that. I care about freedom too, and I think that's the thing we can agree upon. All right, a lot to dissect there. If you know me, I love the elections, the data, statistics. This is like my specialty. The Florida races, let's start there. The fact that they were within 8 points, just a falsehood. They were both around 13 and 14 wins for the Republican Party, with the sixth outpacing it.
Data's right there.
Yeah, that's 14, not 8. 56 minus 42. Second of all, the other race, Randy Fine. And I like that you brought up campaign finance reform. Me and Liz, actually, you think we disagree politically. We had a great conversation about that yesterday. We're good friends.
Better be careful.
It was a good conversation. So, you want to talk about the Florida races. Randy Fine runs in the 6th on the southeast section of Florida, gets outspent 10-1. Jimmy Petronis up in the 1st, gets outspent 4-1. And if you're into the data, you folks at home will know the Republican and Democrat Party and their bases have completely changed. Republicans are backed by low propensity voters that don't show up in special elections. I can cite Ohio's 6th District, Michael Rulli in 2024, where he underperformed because Republicans don't show up on special elections. You want to talk Wisconsin, 2023, a year prior to Donald Trump winning it by 1 point, the conservative for the election lost by even more than Mr. Schimmel lost 2 nights ago. So special elections always favor Democrats. It's just a fact. I can go down the laundry list. Ron Estes in Kansas, Mike Flood in Nebraska. Low propensity voters, which make up the Republican Party, do not vote. I want to change that, but that's the reality of it. And talking about bought and paid for, J.B. Pritzker, George Soros, those are all your billionaire friends. I saw a funny headline from the Babylon Bee that Democrats celebrated beating the billionaires at George Soros' house after the Wisconsin special election. You can't make it up. I want campaign finance reform. The special elections, we've seen them for decades, favor Democrats. It really means nothing, and I think Donald Trump's agenda is about where it's always been, around a 50 to 52% approval rating.
I mean, if you want to talk about, billionaire candidates, let's talk about Eric Hovde. Let's talk about Dave McCormick. Let's talk about Mehmet Oz.
J.B. Pritzker.
100% we can talk about J.B. Pritzker, but
We
I will
know
say
he's a billionaire. That's not new information.
That's not new information, but I would also say, you guys also run your fair share of billionaires
Of
for
course.
seats and then have them pretend like they're, men of the people, but they're not. I also think that in this case, what I think is something that you ought to be nervous about is the pulling of Elise Stefanik's, the withdrawal of her nomination, because they are worried she's going to lose her seat in the special election to a Democrat, even though her seat's pretty protected and pretty safe. So I think it's showing that you guys don't have a lot of time before the House will eventually flip, and you guys don't have a lot of time before we go through Senate elections. I think at this time, if you're concerned that you're going to lose a special election in Elise Stefanik's district, I think the writing is on the wall for what the midterms are going to look like, and I think it should cause a lot of concern for y'all, especially going into these special elections and now going into 2026 midterms.
Kieran, Paul, I want you to.
Yeah, I just want to take a step back from the whole thing. Let's look at how the country as a whole is really looking at the two parties itself. First off, the Democrats have an all-time low 27% approval rating. Obviously not appreciating the job that they're doing in Congress, understandably so. And for the first time you mentioned, Mara, you said that, that Americans do not believe that this country is going the right track based off of the policies that Donald Trump has put forward. But for the first time since 2001, 44% of Americans think that the country is going in the right track. That's an NBC poll. Again, 52% of Americans believe Donald Trump is doing a good job in office, his latest approval rating. So I just don't understand where this is coming from, in the sense of the American people don't think he's doing well. We have 77% of Americans think that he's fulfilling his campaign promises. I mean, this is a generally well-liked presidency for an underwhelmingly polling President Trump.
So I want to get final thoughts from everyone before we wrap it up.
My final thoughts are, I have a lot to think about with what I heard tonight. I think you guys made decent points. I'm not going to sit here and say that you guys are morons who don't know what you're talking about, because I think that that's not true. I think that you are smart and you know what you're talking about. Now, my thought on this, despite everything you said, is that this country is not going the right way. I think systemically, rounding people up in groups, which I'm a Jew, for my people, not a fond memory. I think rounding people up in groups and catching innocent, decent Americans in the mix is abhorrent. I think that these blanket tariffs are going to hurt us. They're going to hurt the little guy, and the billionaires who sit at home doing their thing, don't read their bills. They're not going to think much of it. It's not a real concern for the kind of people that Donald Trump keeps in his company, but it's going to hurt real Americans, the bottom levels of our tax brackets. And I think that I am scared that if Trump continues his plans, which, as we know, yes, his plans have been out there for 2 years. They're well documented. I'm not arguing with you on that. I think if they keep going in that direction, I'll be pretty scared to stay in this country, to be so honest with you. I'm protected by a lot of minority classes, and there are a lot of people I care about who fall within the communities that Donald Trump is hurting directly. This is a scary time, and maybe his approval ratings are great, but that doesn't inspire a lot of confidence in me personally. I'm nervous. That's what I'm trying to get across here. I am scared because of this president.
Liz, do you want to?
Sure, I just want to do a quick synopsis of what we've sort of talked about here. The Signal chat, just another example of how ill-equipped the Trump administration is and how unable they are to take accountability for adding a journalist to a chat in which they shared plans that spanned multiple hours, and if were leaked, could jeopardize the entire operation and the pilots who flew those F-18s. And then let's go into immigration. I think the way that they are doing this is completely disorganized. I think we can all agree that illegal immigration needs to be addressed, but I think we can also agree that everyone should be applied due process in this country, and that shouldn't stop. And I think we shouldn't be using illegal black sites that had caused concerns and constitutional questions in the past. And then further going on to tariffs, not only were they chaotically applied, not thought through, and completely illogical in their placement, but additionally, it's causing a crisis of confidence amongst consumers and manufacturers. And if we really want to work on bringing manufacturing back to the United States, we don't do it by shocking the market. We do it by creating incentives to bring business back to this country, and we haven't done that. This isn't a project that's going to take 4 years. This is a project that's going to take a long time, and this is not the way we fix that. And then lastly, I want to go back into the elections. I think Republicans should be very worried about their midterm performance, because if you're nervous that having Elise Stefanik in Trump's cabinet will cause a loss of a seat in the House, then you have a lot of concern coming your way. Because if I look at the House map now, I don't think it's going to be particularly helpful for all of you. And lastly, I think there's a lot of concerns for us as students, not only the amount of aid that's being given to our university, but the fact that the Department of Education could be completely opened up or completely eliminated. It scares a lot of people, especially those who rely on financial aid. And I think not only has Donald Trump vilified the Department of Education and made students feel unsafe, but also the increased amount of ICE on our campus, the increasing amount of deportations of actual U.S. citizens by mistake, as well as the suppression of those who want to protest but feel that their institutions will be targeted if they do. I think that's unfair. And I think at the end of the day, it's just another cause for concern for students, for those who are in higher education like all of us are. And I think at the end of the day, the only thing that this has brought is more chaos, less trust, and an increased amount of fear in this country. And I don't think the Republicans are as safe as they believe when it comes to their election prospects.
Kieran, we can just go down the line.
Yeah, please. First off, in closing, I really appreciate that we have these open dialogue debates. I know I'm a big proponent of freedom of speech, and I think a place like a college campus was really founded on the ideal of open political dialogue, discourse, and thought. And I think stuff like this is fantastic. And thank you to GWTV for setting it up. And look, talk about the administration. My main theme that when I have these politically charged conversations is kind of this. November 5th, we had the greatest test of the American electorate, which is an election. The greatest opinion poll is in the ballot box, and what did we see? We saw an election where the people not even said, they demanded major government change and a shift. We had 4 years, I know you don't like when I go back on it, people weren't happy. They wanted a complete opposite trajectory of the American state in itself. I think if you go down the laundry list of issues, very simply put, Donald Trump is fulfilling his campaign promises on immigration, which was, I think, the second hottest issue in the election. The problem at the border is solved. There's really no more illegal migration into this country. It's down 96%. Of course, you're going to have a little bit. The immigration problem is solved. We promised tariffs and economic change. We're not going to kick the can down the road anymore. We're going to actually go for it and change the system that has hurt so many Americans all over the country. Those Americans predominantly were the ones who voted for this change. I think the Democrat Party has a real identity problem. They're approved by only 27% of the electorate. And really what I've seen, I'm into reading about all the political stuff, they have seemed to totally transformed into a reactionary party that really doesn't stand for anything. And I would quell the nerves of those who saw the special election 2 nights ago. This is what happens in special elections. Liz is from Pennsylvania. I recall in 2018, everyone freaked out when Conor Lamb was elected in Western PA. Special elections favor Democrats. It's what happens, and I don't think anyone should be really worried. But, in closing, I think we're making progress. I think these issues are difficult. Like you mentioned, they're long-term issues. They're going to take time. And I am confident in our president, in our administration, and, the utmost thought is the American people voted for it. That's democracy, and it's playing out.
I agree with my counterpart. I just want to say thanks again for everyone being here and having this great discussion. I think we agree on some things, maybe not all things, but we agree on some, and I think that's good to always find a middle ground. But I will agree with pretty much everything that Kieran has said. Look, I think it's a long-term thing, and what we are seeing is an administration taking effective and efficient action to really fulfill the campaign promises that he has now touted for such a long period of time. Look, we are seeing American enthusiasm is on the rise. 44% of Americans think America is on the right track. And these numbers, I can go on and on for days about just how much the American people actually like this second Trump administration, who has, like I said, always polled significantly lower than his actual numbers say. So I think we have a bright future, and I'm very excited to see what happens.
Thank you guys so much for such a lively discussion. Before we wrap up, let's turn to our reporting on special election results from Tuesday.
Special elections took place across the U.S. this past week, but the race that captured national attention was the Wisconsin Supreme Court election. Last Tuesday, Wisconsin voters elected Liberal candidate Susan Crawford over conservative Brad Schimmel, securing a 4-3 Liberal majority on the court. The victory marks a major win for Democrats, their first since President Trump took office 2 months ago, and could have lasting implications for the state's judicial and political landscape. Unlike previous judicial elections, this race became a national battleground when Trump publicly endorsed Schimmel, framing the race as a referendum on his administration's early policies. Adding to the high stakes, billionaire Elon Musk poured more than $20 million into the race, making it the most expensive judicial contest in U.S. history. Musk's involvement extended beyond campaign donations. He personally campaigned for Schimmel, and just 36 hours before polls opened, handed out 2 $1 million checks to randomly selected attendees at a rally. This so-called $1 million lottery was met with immediate backlash, with critics calling it a blatant attempt to buy votes. Election law experts debated whether Musk's actions crossed ethical or legal lines, but ultimately the election proceeded without intervention. At her victory party, Crawford addressed these concerns directly, calling her win a rejection of big money influence in judicial elections, saying this.
As a little girl growing up in Chippewa Falls, I never could have imagined that I'd be taking on the richest man in the world for justice in Wisconsin. And we won.
Despite the unprecedented spending and high-profile endorsements, Crawford won by a decisive 10-point margin, a striking shift in a state Trump had carried by just 1 point in the 2024 election. Notably, every county in Wisconsin moved to the left since 2024, with some shifting as much as 17 points, suggesting a much broader shift in voter sentiment. Crawford's victory is part of a much larger pattern of Democratic success in recent special elections. This leftward shift extended beyond Wisconsin. On the same day, Florida held 2 special congressional elections. Although Republicans retained both seats and slightly expanded their House majority, the margins of victory were far tighter than expected. In Florida's 6th congressional district, Republican Randy Fine defeated Democrat Josh Whale by 10 points. While this may seem like a comfortable victory, it pales in comparison to Trump's 30-point win in the district just months earlier. A similar trend was seen in Florida's 1st congressional district, where Republican Jimmy Patronis won by 14 points, considerably less than former Congressman Matt Gaetz's 32-point margin in 2024. Political analysts say these results indicate potential trouble for Republicans, particularly in historically red areas. Unexpectedly close races suggest that some Republican voters may be growing disillusioned, while Democratic enthusiasm remains strong. A week earlier in Pennsylvania, Democrats pulled off another upset, flipping a state Senate seat in a district that had favored Trump by 15 points and had been held by Republicans for more than 40 years. The win further fueled speculation that Democrats are gaining momentum ahead of future elections. Political strategists from both parties have weighed in on potential reasons behind the trend. Some attribute the Democratic overperformance to lingering backlash against Trump's policies and his handling of the economy. Others point to concerns over Musk's growing political influence, with voters rejecting what they see as billionaires attempting to steer elections. Meanwhile, Republicans have downplayed the significance of these results, arguing that special elections do not always predict broader national trends. House Speaker Mike Johnson stated that while some races were closer than expected, the GOP remains confident in its ability to hold and expand its majorities in future elections. For now, one thing is clear. Voters across the country are making their voices heard, and both parties are watching closely to see what happens next. For Capital Crossfire, I'm Devin Gilbert.
Thank you to our guests for coming on tonight and having such a lively discussion. Now it is time for our fact check. We had a lot of different facts today and a lot of different conversations that we will now be getting into.
On the question of Social Security, immigrants legally authorized to work receive SSNs. They do not receive payments.
Elon Musk is a citizen.
56% of Americans oppose new tariffs.
7 in 10 say goods will be made more expensive.
Under Biden, FDI was higher than all years under Trump.
Egg prices have increased since January 20th by 19%.
Trump's approval rating is 49% and illegal immigration is down 60%. Be sure to follow us on social media at GW Capital Crossfire and check out our website at www.gw-tv.com.
We'll see you next season, and as always, thanks for getting caught in the crossfire with us.